Hello and welcome everybody to a new style of video here on Comedian MTG. I'm your host Ian, and today we are breaking down a card from the Zendikar Rising Commander products. We're breaking down Anowon the Ruin Thief. Now you may recognize Anowon as the face card from the Sneak Attack deck, and it has a lot of interesting tribal synergies. And when I saw it, I immediately thought that it might make an interesting commander for a blue-black consultation mid-range deck. However, there was a lot of things I wasn't sure about, specifically how many times its ability will trigger during the average game of CEDH. So I ran a lot of those numbers, and that's what I'm bringing to you today, sort of an analysis on whether I think this deck will be actually playable in a competitive environment. So the specific questions I have are, how many times will I be able to draw off of Anowon's second ability? Because it only triggers once per player and equal to the damage that you deal with those rogues. And even in that scenario, you're only getting a card for every creature you mill. So because of that, there's definitely some qualifications to know if we're even going to be able to draw cards off of Anowon. Luckily, rogues are an evasive tribe, so that part really isn't the problem. The question is, for every time that I mill an opponent, how many creatures am I likely to hit? To find this information, I went over to the CEDH deck list database, the prime source for any deck list in the CEDH format. Now, the deck list database is full of a huge variety of decks, so to keep things clean and concise, I only recorded decks that are recommended by the database managers, meaning the decks that were specifically chosen as representations of competitive EDH by the people who run the database. Of these decks, it filtered down to 22 categories of decks. From there are 52 decks in the database in total that I took information from. The information I took was how many creatures is each list running. I did the math, and we are averaging 14.63 creatures over all 52 decks, meaning that there is a 15% chance approximately that every single damage will mill over one creature. Now obviously this gets doubled if you are dealing 2 damage or more, and this is scaled proportionally from that. And also luckily, Anowon buffs the aforementioned creatures in our decks, meaning that we will at least have a 30% chance every time we hit with one of our creatures to trigger its ability. Now the real question is 30% chance an acceptable ratio? Because Anowon is the reason we are using this variant of this deck. It is the reason we are putting all of these rogues into our deck. And if 30% isn't enough, what is an acceptable ratio? The numbers are still not as cut and dry as we have talked about, just because of the fact that there is a difference in your pod. For example, I am much more likely to be in a pod where I attack an Animar player who has 40 creatures in their deck than, for example, an Urza Polytyrant deck, a deck that basically plays a single creature in the list so they can get it out for a combo. Well, the conclusion I seem to be coming to right now is that 30% is still pretty low. So the question now becomes, is it worth it to run Anowon if that's not the only reason we are using this commander? Let's talk about other payoffs, such as Knowledge Exploitation and Notorious Throng. Now these cards get absolutely out of hand with Anowon, because Knowledge Exploitation basically allows us to steal the best instant and sorcery out of our opponent's deck for 4 mana. And for those who have been paying attention to the format right now, Ad Nauseam and Peer into the Abyss are very heavily played cards. So being able to steal that and cast it out of an opponent's deck for only 4 mana is absolutely insane. And the payoff for Notorious Throng with our commander is ridiculous. We get to not only make a bunch of creatures that will trigger Anowon more often, but we also get to potentially take an extra turn, which is a great payoff. So apart from these rogue tribal spells, is there anything else paying us off? Well, Anowon's ability involves us milling our opponents. Is this something we can take advantage of in the competitive environment? The card that jumped out to me right away was Mnemonic Betrayal. Now this card is basically a Yawgmoth's Will, but instead of using our own graveyards, we get to use all of our opponent's graveyards. Now decks like Blue Farm have been abusing this card for a little bit, and I know Surku was a really early adapter of this card. Is this card enough to make Anawan a viable option? Because the effect of being able to mill your opponents for great deals and then cast a Mnemonic Betrayal is absolutely insane, and it basically guarantees a win on your Storm turn. So the data we have now is that Anawan breaks Mnemonic Betrayal. Knowledge Exploitation and Notorious Throng are especially potent in this deck, and when we're attacking with our rogues, we have a minimum chance of about 30% to be able to trigger its ability on the average competitive deck recommended on the CEDH decklist database. So instead of making assumptions on to whether this commander is going to be competitive or not, I'll just leave you with those facts. I know personally I'm going to try brewing the deck and test it out in a few pods. I am a little skeptical, but it also is a really unique strategy, and I have a feeling when more and more rogues are added to the deck that the payoff from Anawan's ability will be a lot stronger, so I'm excited to test it out. Alright everybody, I really hope you enjoyed this video. I know it is not my normal gameplay stuff, but I think it is really fun to analyze new cards, and I'm excited to test out these new Zendikar Legends. If you want to support the channel, please hit like and subscribe while you're here on YouTube, and if you want to go that extra mile, any support on our Patreon page helps out a whole lot, and you can get your name in the credits like these awesome people right here.